Light Pollution News 2025 Myth Busted. What an episode we have for you today. Joining me is lighting designer Dr. Amardeep Dugar, astrotourism guru Stéphane Picard, and author of the new book Creatures of Darkness, Dani Robertson. Today, the saga of the Melrose Park, Fort Lauderdale, Florida community comes to an unceremonious end. Are we prone to self-harm at night? And maybe you're searching for the perfect gift for a loved one still? Well, look no farther than a bed for your phone. Happy holidays, everyone. We hope you enjoy this episode of Light Pollution News. Welcome to another Light Pollution News. I'm your host, Bill McGeaney. We do the show twice a month discussing the news around our vanishing nighttime environment. I'd like to welcome any new listeners with us today. Thank you for tuning in. As a reminder, you can find everything discussed today by heading over to lightpollutionnews.com. If you like what you hear today, you like the work we do, why not support the show? Interested in learning more? Simply click the Support the Show link on your podcast player show notes or head over to our website, lightpollutionnews.com. So with me today, first up is Stéphane Picard. And Stéphane, you're up there in New Brunswick, right? Right on the coast up in Canada. And I came across your name in a really cool little project you're doing up in New Brunswick. It was in the news a few months back that you're trying to essentially create a dark sky corridor up along coastal Canada. So why don't you tell me a little bit more about this?
Thanks for having me on the show, Bill, and really excited to be here. So I started Cliff Valley Astronomy a little bit over 2.5 years ago, and initially we were just catering to do stargazing, but with 30 years of background in the marketing and advertising, I kind of merged my skill sets between being an astronomer and a marketer into exploring more astrotourism. And sure enough, as we started getting interest and picking up clients who were either communities or specific land masses that were looking to get accredited as a certified dark sky site, we already had 4 in the province certified dark sky sites through the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, 3 dark sky preserves, and Canada's first urban star park. 2 of them are on the Bay of Fundy. The Bay of Fundy is the body of water that separates New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, kind of. And it's home to the highest tides in the world. So we had 2 established dark sky sites there with the Fundy National Park and also the Irving Nature Park here about 20 minutes from where I live. And I started getting some projects. A nearby community of Fundy St. Martin's wants to become a designated dark sky community. And then as I looked and I was collaborating with other partners, including the Provincial Parks Network for province, I realized there was 3 provincial parks that would be ideally suited. And all of a sudden, when you kind of looked at that, I was like, oh, wow, okay, we have the potential for a total of at least 6 certified dark sky sites here in the next year or 2. And the more we looked into it, of course, being a marketer, I love doing research and data, we quickly realized that it may become the highest concentration of dark sky sites anywhere in the world, with about 6 sites within 180 kilometers or about 125 mile stretch. So that's something that a lot of the partners that I'm working with, including our provincial tourism department, they're very much keen on, the why now and all that, a number of things. Astrotourism is growing at an incredible rate. It's probably the fastest growing travel and tourism segment in the world. But for so long, New Brunswick's been called too small. 85% or more of our landmass is forested. So, for example, I live just outside one of the largest cities in New Brunswick, the city of St. John, about 130,000 population, between 15 to 20 minutes from the downtown core, and I got a Bordeaux 3 sky in my backyard. So not only do we have an abundance of dark skies, they're easy to access, even if you're in one of our major cities. Now, when I say major cities, I don't think we have a city over 150,000 people. But yeah, so now we've got the traction and we have the support from our provincial tourism department and all the partners along the coast that are going to be part of this, which includes federal, provincial, and even municipal and private sector partners.
Stéphane, I got a question on the designations. So the Royal Astronomical Society versus Dark Sky International, what's the difference in how you apply and maybe what they're looking for these designations?
That's a great question. So originally the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, which has been around for, I believe, over 100 years, was always that national leadership for a development of astronomy as a hobby and passion and all that. And over the years, eventually they started accrediting sites as a refuge for people to be able to do astronomy, right? Protecting some land masses so that we have great access to great skies. Now, Canada's the second largest country in the world, but we are probably I think 50th as far as population, and 85% of our population's within 100 miles of the US border. But that's a lot of land that's unpopulated. It's just not very accessible. So when you look at that stretch of about 100 kilometers along where most of the people live, well, now it's starting to grow and grow. You've probably heard that 80% of Americans and Europeans don't see the Milky Way from where they live. In Canada, 60% or more of our population can't see the Milky Way from where they live. You know, even though we enjoy the second largest country in the world, which should give us abundance of access, it's not really the case based on where people are residing.
I would flip those numbers and say you guys have 40% of people can see the Milky Way, which is more than what we have down here in the US.
Exactly. So the distinction is the Royal Astronomical is not as far developed in its accreditation programs such as Dark Sky International or the Starlight Foundation, of which the Dark Sky International, I was one of about 30 international advocates this past week that we got invited to a pre-release of what they're revamping the whole accreditation program. So I was one of 30 people from around the world who got a first glimpse of this, and they wanted our feedbacks and all that. It's all positive for the most part. I think they're taking it in a really interesting direction. I'm kind of leading and pushing many of my clients who are very much in the game of tourism or economic development towards Dark Sky International, because I believe their program allows for a better fit and better synergy for tourism and those types of activities. You know, I know RASC is looking at, and when I say RASC, that's short for Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. They are looking at adding more. There's currently only 3 levels, which is a dark sky preserve, a nocturnal preserve, and an urban star park. They don't even look at communities at the moment. So that's why it's kind of also forcing my hand. Plus, Dark Sky International is international. They're conduits for the rest of the world to find you, where RASC is more centric to Canada itself. So if you're in the tourism game, you'd like to have also the international reach. So that's kind of the difference between both of them.
Stéphane, are any of these plans areas that people can actually engage with the night sky? And let me qualify that real fast. I've been kind of personally wishing that some of these places would pick up a Cherry Springs model, or a model. I think there's a place down in Georgia which has a similar model whereby they have fields that are designed for use for actual amateur astronomers. Are any of these places going to, say, provide electric for people to set up and use their telescopes and astrophotography and all that stuff?
The key thing that I found from experience as an astronomer, and also now more that I've been involved on that aspect, is, for example, Mount Carlton Provincial Park here in New Brunswick is a provincial park. It is one of our darkest, it is probably the darkest one of the 4 we have right now. It has a portal 1 in the southern portion of the park, but they were only relying on the New Brunswick chapter, the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, to do 1 event per year for a star party. And I was like, we have the darkest skies in the province here. It should be almost a weekly thing, right? Because the quality of the sky there is just amazing, right? People don't understand the value of a portal 1 compared to any other. You know, each organization, whether it's RASC, Dark Sky International, or Starlight Foundation, part of the accreditation process and requirements is you have outreach and events. And I think I see a lot of places get their designation, and initially there's a lot of interest and all that. And then it becomes maybe there's the local astronomy clubs that's only once or twice an activity or an event per year, which I find it's such a underutilizing that what I believe is an incredible asset. So that's where we're positioned ourselves. We're going an existing accredited place. We're working with them and developing programming, educational forms and platforms for anybody, doesn't matter your knowledge of the sky, to incorporating historical, cultural aspects, including indigenous experiences, which are very rich and add a lot of texture. I had one of the indigenous elders from one of the communities here in New Brunswick at an event I did back in March, and she explained the Big Dipper represented 7 hunting birds, and each bird has its own legend or story. And as an astronomer, well, I'm trained that, there's 7 stars, Alcor, Mysore, and all this and that. And now I cannot look at the Big Dipper ever the same way because I know there's so much more meaning. And skyearth.org just published one of my Pleiades images last week as part of their social media promo. And I had somebody from India start talking about what the Pleiades represented to the culture over in India, I believe a Hindu significance and all that. And I was like, tell me more. Like, I want to eat that up. I want to sponge it all up because I find it's such an enriching aspect. And it's not always telescopes, expensive gadgets and all this and that. It could be just sitting around, the campfire and explaining because before all this technology came around, all cultures, all civilizations relied on the night sky for survival even.
Yep. Yeah, I hear you, Stéphane. I think on some of these designations in Pennsylvania with Cherry Springs, we're lucky enough to have a dark sky spot that's accessible to most of the major metropolitan areas in the northeastern part of the United States, which is astounding, right? Now, you might have to stretch that out a bit if you say Boston or Hartford or whatnot, but count off the top of my head, like 5 major cities in the U.S. that can access it. And that place is always jumping on new moons. And part of it is because they have an established field for astronomers to go to. Essentially, they can have hookups and everything to actually do astronomy. And then you have a public side where people rent Airbnbs in the area and they go and see presentations of the night sky and they see these things. And I know Dani does some of this stuff. So I'm going to switch over. I'm going to transition Dani and I'm going to get to our last guest, Dr. Dugar, in a second. So let me introduce someone who actually lives in parks and, well, you don't live in a park, but you're a dark sky ranger, Dani Robertson, who actually just has a new book that came out. We'll talk about that in the second episode. I don't have enough time here in the first episode to go through it. But Dani, welcome back. I'm glad to see you. How you been?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you very much. And I have to correct you. I do actually live in a park.
Oh, well, I was wrong.
I am very lucky. I'm very fortunate where I live. So, yeah, a little humble brag, living in a park.
That's great. So how do you like it? Tell me a little more about that part.
I love it. It's Bottle 4 skies, pushing Bottle 3 where I live. So I am really fortunate. And we have a slightly different system to the US and Canada. So we have national parks and we have areas of outstanding natural beauty. So they're still like national parks, but they're just like a one step down. So I live in an AUMB, a national landscape is what we call them. So I am really, really fortunate that I get to live here and I'm surrounded by darkness. But we are actually going to be doing a community project very soon in the village that I live in, where we are going to be adopting dark sky lighting throughout the whole village. So hopefully it'll be firmly put into Portal 3 by the time that happens.
That's great. But you do a lot of outreach similar to what Stéphane was talking about, right?
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, my job, I work for Eryri National Park and the other national landscapes in Wales. And when we got our dark sky reserve status in 2015, they wanted to capitalise on that. So they hired me, a dark sky person, to go around. So I have a van, which we have dubbed the Mobile Observatory, and it's got a really cool wrap on it. So it's called the Mobile Observatory, and it's got stars all over it. And it's just full of telescopes and loads of different things to do with like wildlife and things like that. And I drive it around to remote communities and I help them get outdoors so that they can access the stars, because we kind of have this weird 50-50 like clientele, I guess, are the people who come to our events. So we have the local people who see stars all the time and they take darkness for granted because they're like, well, yeah, I go outside and I see the stars, but they might not necessarily know a lot about the stars or they want to know more. And then we get people who've traveled really, really far from the cities and towns. So people will drive like 7 hours to come to our events, which I know in America, that's probably not, doesn't sound that far, but in the UK, that's quite a lot. That's quite far for people in the UK to drive for an event. So we get a really big mix. And when we talk about outreach and things, and we do have all these gadgets and telescopes, as Stéphane was saying, that I think that can be a little bit of a barrier for people. So I'm sort of there to hold people's hands to say, like, you don't need telescopes. Here is one if you want to have a look at it, but look at how much you can actually see with the naked eye if you go somewhere dark. And we'll talk about why that's important for like their health as well and for the wildlife. And it's about trying to like hook in loads of different ways to get people interested in the night sky so that they want to protect the darkness. And I think it's been working really well. Our events are so popular. I can't run enough events. I've always got huge waiting lists for our events. And I think it's important as well for people who are thinking about outreach. Maybe they don't know a lot. Maybe they're not an astronomer, because I'm not an astronomer by trade. I'm an amateur. But I think it's important for people to understand that, you go into a garden and you look at the flowers and you might not know what the name for each of those flowers are. But if you look at the stars, it's the same thing. You don't need to know what every single star is to appreciate them and appreciate what you get from them. So just being able to know like the bare minimum, know your way around a few constellations, I think that's really beneficial for people. And then it's not too overwhelming for people who are brand new to astronomy as well. And the whole cultural thing. We have native names in the Welsh language, in Cymraeg, so we have our own myths and legends that go with the stars, and it's exactly the same. It's about these stories that have been eroded by light pollution and by lots of other, societal issues in the areas, getting those put in the spotlight, if you will. I think that's it captures people's imaginations and it brings people together from all over, because they'll say, oh, I know a story quite similar to that like my grandma would tell me, or like someone else in my family was told me, but it was slightly different because maybe they came from like Poland or somewhere else in Europe, or, they've got all these slight different takes on the same stories. When you get to the core, they're all very similar, but they've all got like slightly different. It's like a little thumbprint from each community. They've all got a slightly different way of telling their stories, and they'll all have a slightly different reason for it being a story. So in Wales, we have a lot of agriculture. So a lot of it is to do with like the agricultural calendar. So a lot of the star signs are to do with like shepherding animals or, doing stuff on the land. And then the reason I bring up like other European countries, we were working with Ukrainian refugees and they were like, oh, we have the plough, but to us, it's not the plough, it's the wagon. So for them, that was a salt trader's wagon. And as the wagon moved through the night sky, it left a trail of salt behind it, which I absolutely loved that story. And it was so nice for the Ukrainian people to be able to tell a piece of their homeland, and they could see a piece of their homeland in Wales, because they were like, well, we see the Milky Way at home and now we can see it here. And that was so special for them. It was so lovely. I got a bit emotional really when I was with them, but there's all these things that you don't think are going to happen, and then it's not the way I ever envisaged when I started this job. That's not the kind of experiences I expected to have. But now I can see like how important culturally and how personally these stories affect people as well, which is really lovely. And it's just so unexpected.
Dani, when you first came on sometime early last year, I said you have one of the greatest jobs in the world. Now I really fully think you definitely, like, you've found a way to one up that. This sounds great job out there. So, man, living in a park and being able to see the stars every night, and then working with people and helping them get inspired by simply just seeing a different half of the day that they probably have never seen.
Yeah, I am really, really lucky. And I tell people all the time, I've got the best job in the world. I worked a lot of really terrible jobs, so I feel like I've banked it up like karma-wise. I've done some terrible jobs, and now it's my time to have a nice job.
That's right. You've earned it. Well, the last guest here, definitely not the least guest, is Dr. Amardeep Dugar. And Dr. Dugar is a certified lighting designer, a member of the International Association of Lighting Designers and the Lighting Designers Association of India. Amardeep also serves on the Illuminating Engineering Society's board of directors and chairs the IES Global Development Committee and is the co-founder of the virtual lighting design community. And before the show, we were talking about a little project that you were doing.
This was in India, in South India, in a place called Coorg, which is in the state of Karnataka and bordering Kerala.
And you had mentioned that they put up some pretty astounding bright lights to deter elephants. Is that the case?
Oh man, this is a client that I've been working on a couple of other projects, and I said, hey, I'm doing this resort. Could you just go and have a look and let me know how the lighting is? And it was quite a drive from my city to this place, beautiful place. It's called Coorg. It's in the middle of the forest, and it's got a lot of these elephant population there. And I landed there, and I was hoping to see a really nice resort kind of a feel where you have these, what we have read recently, and with the whole news about light pollution and lighting designers being more sensitive to, I'm a lighting designer. I work as a lighting designer. Lighting designers need to be more sensitive towards the environment. So I had these beautiful ideas in mind about these warm lights and really low level lights, no pollution, and something which you could just enjoy and be with nature. And I land there and bang, and I see these huge street lights at 6,500 Kelvin and super bright. And I'm like, what on earth is that? The reasoning given was this was something where there are a lot of elephants here. And I went back and did a little bit of a search about elephants. Now, elephants are primarily diurnal beings, diurnal species. And interestingly, I came across a new phrase called elephants are crepuscular species. So crepuscular means they also work during the dawn or the dusk, because places like India and Africa, it gets really hot during the day, and which is not very suitable for elephants, the fact that they're huge. So for their foraging, they either work when it's slightly dusk or when it's dawn before it gets too sunny. And so obviously they need light. They don't need bright lights at night. So you don't need to deter them with such lights. So my first job was to reject all these light fixtures and send them all back from this resort. Obviously the client wasn't happy. The architect wasn't happy, but okay, you need to do what you got to do. So you got me on board. So you better listen to what I have to say. So I really don't know that I'm going to get the next project from this client, but hopefully, fingers crossed.
I got a question on the lighting color. Maybe you can help me here on this one. I had a guest on back in January, and he mentioned that he believed that areas like the tropics actually prefer brighter, bluer lights, and areas that were kind of away from the tropics preferred warmer lights. Is that just a factor of, manufacturing, like an industry sales pitch, or is that something that people actually prefer?
I'm so happy that you asked this question, because about 10 years ago, one of my students wanted to research on the same subjects, because that's what we've been taught. And interestingly, even sometimes in our conversations during lighting design schools, we say that people in warmer climates prefer cooler color temperatures, and people from cooler climates prefer warm color temperatures. So here I had a student from India. He said, I really want to study this. And we actually conducted a research on just people's preferences for color temperatures with a sample size. And this was done in the city of Hyderabad. So now Hyderabad would not represent the entire population of India or the entire population of warm countries. But still, we needed to start somewhere. And interestingly, what we did find is that there is no such relevance of warm color temperature. In fact, people actually preferred warmer color temperatures in cities of India. And they said that only specific tasks, when you have to read, that's when they prefer, and not even the cool color temperatures of 6,500. I think the coolest that they preferred was a 4,000 Kelvin. So I would say that this was a myth. And what my students' research did was it busted a myth. So, and the research paper is already there. It's been published. If you just do a search for color temperatures and Indian climatic conditions, you'll just find this on the internet.
Well, that's great. I've been wondering about that. So thank you, Amardeep. That's something that I didn't know if it was a myth. I didn't know if it was actually, people having preferences, or I assume that there was just some delivery, some sales pitch out there that was selling the same products to different areas, different cities, different countries and whatnot. So maybe that's right. So real fast, before we jump in, I just am curious. You have a deep passion for lighting, obviously. What initiated that passion for lighting?
Now, this is a story that I've shared in a lot of other talk shows. So I need to be as precise because then I don't want to change.
You can change it up here. You're fine to change it up here. Feel free.
Because then I want people coming back and saying that you said this in that talk show. So I'll try to be as precise as possible. I started out as an architect. So I studied architecture, and architects, when they graduate, we all start off reading with the Ayn Rand book, which is The Fountainhead. I don't know whether you've heard about that. And Fountainhead is...
Ayn Rand is part of your architectural... I did not know that we had it. Oh, man. Okay.
Yeah. So
when did we get to Atlas Shrugged?
A lot of books.
You guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ayn Rand writes a lot of books, and she wrote this one book called Fountainhead, which has really touched a lot of architects. And there's this whole story is about this super egocentric architect. And then when we read that, when you're studying architecture, so you have these really huge, big egos. So lighting was never in the picture. I want to do something on smart buildings. And during my architecture studies, you have this dissertation project where I was looking at an intelligent sort of solution. So I looked at a hotel case study, and my supervisor asked me to go visit the case study and take some more data. And I went to the study, and I met this electrician who gave me some information about the hotel, the window, the system. And then he made a statement which really changed my life. And he said that you architects, you really don't know how to light up buildings. I'm like, what do you mean? I said, see, I'm the fountainhead architect, and I have this big ego. And suddenly you have an electrician who comes and tells you, nonsense, you don't know anything. So it really hits you. So I'm a young architect. So I said, why do you say that? So he said, see, look at this sandstone wall here. You architects, you light it up with just these spots and you create these ugly scallops. So what did you do? So he said, he switched on. He said, and this is pre-LEDs. This was 25 years ago, more than 25 years ago. So what he'd done is he's used these fluorescent lamps to wash the sandstone wall, give it a nice gradation and tone to that. Say, this is how you're supposed to light up a sandstone wall. And that really got me thinking, can there be something called study in lighting? So I went back to my dean and I said, hey, I want to change my topic. And like, what? I said, I met this and I talked about lighting. And my dean said, yes, go ahead and change your topic to lighting. So that's one got me hooked onto lighting. And I did my dissertation on lighting, did a thesis on lighting. And my dean said, would you want to pursue a career in lighting? I said, what? Is there a career in lighting? I didn't know. I said, yes, of course. There's something called lighting design. You could pursue, do a master's. Rest to say there's history. I did a master's and I got even more interested. Then I did a PhD in lighting. And here I am.
Usually it comes from the creative side. I've noticed that with a lot of lighting designers, which is great. That's amazing. More amazing that a electrician spurred that whole idea, because I've seen a lot of work done by electricians and it's not inspiring. I'll just leave it right there.
I really have to thank this I don't know his name. I've never met him again, but it was a life-changing conversation, I must say. That's
great. Okay. Well, I'm going to get the show started here with this piece I found from Fast Company. Have you guys ever thought it'd be a great idea to, if I could just tuck my phone in at night? Have you ever had that thought? Stéphane's shaking his head. Amardeep saying yes. Dani, do you tuck your phone in at night? Do you give it nice little sheets, a nice little puffed up pillow? And
I try and keep it as far away as possible from me at night. So maybe giving it a bed would be a good place to put it.
You can buy one now. Actually, IKEA created a little tiny bed. Of course, it'd be IKEA. For your phone, and it's essentially their phone sleep collection, and it kind of looks like an IKEA bed, and you are awarded some kind of shopping voucher if you are able to keep your phone in that bucket for 7 hours. It has some kind of chip in there where it just racks up the time, I guess. So, hey, if you need a bed, if someone would like a bed for their phone, get this little, $1,000 piece of equipment, tuck it in at night so it doesn't keep vibrating and making noise and flashing lights at you. maybe a good present for the holidays. I don't know.
Yeah. It would be welcome on my behalf because my fiance falls asleep with her tablet on the cushion, fall asleep watching shows That's how I'm like, I see the glare all the time. Half the time I get up in the middle of the night, shut off the tablet for her and put it on their nightstand. So it interrupts my sleep, but based on the behavior, this might encourage her to not do that. I can't imagine she's getting a good sleep. So
Does it come in different sizes? Like, would you have a single for a phone, maybe a king size for a tablet? Can you get?
Yeah, right. Yeah, now you're talking.
There you go. IKEA owes us a quarter each.
Yeah. You get the twin for the phone, the king for the tablet. Yeah.
No, I would want one which has got a sleeping bag, which can be traveled, because I travel quite a bit all over the place, and I'm in a different country, and I get these annoying calls from the client, hey, this lamp in my home is not working, or I get these promotional calls, and I'm middle of the night. I'm in the US, and it's somewhere here, and would really love to have a sleeping bag, which I could put the phone inside, and
Oh, there you go. We can get, there you go. I was going to say something else. I'll move on. Well, you guys here on the show, this is a question I think, Dani, when you were last on, I think I know the answer to it for you. But for the other two, are we as humans meant to kind of stay awake past midnight?
So that's something I prefer not to answer as an astronomer, because sometimes I can be out quite late. But no, I think our biology has been through millennia conditioned to, if we sleep at night, we produce melatonin to recharge and heal the body and all that. So especially if you're in really urban centers, there's so many studies that just indicate how it interferes with your health. So no, I don't think we're designed to be up all night and or have too much light in the time we're supposed to rest and sleep. So
I can resonate with Stéphane here, because as a lighting designer, a lot of my work happens at night. But having studied so much about light and health, I would like to make a small statement here, is that as part of my research when I was working studying about light and darkness and the importance of light and darkness, we've all been taught that the exposure to light is what determines your biological clock. That, again, is wrong. It's the exposure to darkness that determines your wake-up cycles. So the number of hours of darkness that you're exposed to is what determines your next day's cycle. And it's so much more important that you're exposed to darkness, that your body tunes to that darkness and then is able to reset, rejuvenate, and get back to your day cycle. So it's not the solar cycles that are that important. It's the lunar cycles that are more important. So your darkness cycles are more important. So exposure to darkness is a mandatory thing for all life forms, not just human beings. So I would definitely agree with Stéphane here.
So I came across a news piece that came through. This happens occasionally, whereby someone reprints something and it's based on a study from a few years back. But I decided to keep this one because I think it's an interesting conversation point. The article argues that humans weren't really meant to be awake in the wee hours of the night, contrary to what, Dani, Stéphane, and I may feel like doing, looking at the stars at night and whatnot. In fact, it goes to further say nighttime's even dangerous for individuals. And what it's saying is that we're more likely to create self-harm, self-deprecating activities because the body is under circadian rhythm duress. So I'm curious about this one. Is this a narrative? Does this feel more like something that's driven by a narrative of evil nights, or is it maybe something that you guys have felt more stressed with misaligned circadian rhythms and you've actually done stuff that would be self-harming?
I think it's interesting because in the UK, we've just swapped over to daylight savings time. I know it's not the same throughout the world, but to save daylight, because we're so far north, it gets dark about 4 p.m. where I am now, and then it's dark until about 8 o'clock the next morning. People get SAD, SAD, so seasonal affective disorder, and people do say that they act out more, and we do have lots of unsalubrious behaviour. Drinking goes up in the wintertime in the UK because people are stuck indoors. And I don't know if it's the dark or more that people feel like because we've demonised the dark, they don't want to go out in the dark, so they're at home, they're bored, they don't know what else to do, so they start drinking or they start doing other things. So yeah, I would be interested to hear if it's the same for countries that don't have such a vast difference, because I guess the closer we get to the equator, the more balanced it is throughout the year. You just guess you get your full day and your full night all year round, which must be nice.
I suspect also, and Dr. Dugar can probably elaborate on this, depending on population density, if you're in rural areas, that's when I think SAD is more prevalent because you're more isolated in rural communities, especially here in Canada with the winters we have and all that. But when you're in an urban center, the life is nonstop, 24/7. More people are working during the night. People are doing shift work. The society and the economy's got to keep churning 24/7. So there's, I think, a larger percentage of the population that in the history of mankind is now trading night like day or and all that. So I don't know if Dr. Dugar has something like that, but I think there's probably a correlation between population density and how it impacts them health-wise with being up at night.
Now, there are different layers to this. It's not a very easy, straightforward answer to if you look at ancient cultures, I come from India, where darkness was revered. Darkness was considered something really a part of a spiritual experience. You enter any of the ancient Hindu temples, the core or the Garbhagriha. Garbhagriha means the womb of the temple. It would signify the place of darkness because that's where a whole spiritual enlightenment happens. And then you come into light. So darkness was something, and this was before, then India was colonized and then the whole demonizing changed. So there's been a lot of colonial backlash that has happened with the cultures and how the way it has changed and now the way people perceive darkness. So darkness is something which really has intrigued me for the last couple of years. And I've been doing studies, going back, studying ancient texts and seeing what it is and what kind of correlation it has today. And yes, I do agree with Stéphane that population density also has a role to play. But interestingly, in ancient villages, there used to be these nighttime rituals too, where they used to have these fires and people looking at stars and worshipping of stars. And so darkness was not something which was considered all bad. There was something which was it was considered a part of a cycle. So that when there's a day cycle, there's a night cycle, it all became part of, there were certain areas where it could create sometimes a fear and uncertainty, which are sporadic incidents, but that's what I would say. And personally, from my personal experience, as I told you, I studied architecture. And when we were students of architecture, it was considered fashionable to do late nights, work at night. And then the next day morning, we would feel really acidic. The whole body would start functioning really bad. Hey, what happened? Why are we feeling this way? At that time, we never realized it. When I look back, it was all your circadian system. Your hormones were getting imbalanced. Your bile was being produced, and that's what was making you all that acidic and feeling of discomfort. So it's all coming together. So now I'm a lot more conscious about my sleep cycles, my wake-up cycles. It's all about awareness. We need to create awareness amongst people, change our own lifestyles to be in tune with nature as much as possible.
To add on lifestyles and cultural things, there's a forgotten habit from the medieval ages in Europe where they would have the habit of 2 sleeps. So this was especially prevalent in the rural peasantry. So they would be really tired after a day in the fields working for landed gentry. They'd go home and they'd basically go straight to sleep because 1, they were exhausted and 2, it would be dark. So they would be like, we'll go to sleep. And then around midnight, everyone in the house would wake up and then they would have a couple of hours where they would just go around and they'd do things that needed to be done. And then they'd go back to sleep again. So it's interesting how culture obviously plays a huge role in it, but it was literally the middle of the night and it was completely normal for them to just get up and do things, make sure the fire was still going, all that kind of stuff. We've definitely been influenced by controlling the environment with light. So as Stéphane was saying about urban areas and light and control, we think we can outrun our own bodies, don't we? We think we can control our environments and that we can just go on forever with light, but sadly it's not the case. We do need to have that dark exposure.
Yeah, and to kind of just back up some of these conversation points you guys are talking about, there's a study that came out in Environmental International this month that found prima facie, well, it took a prima facie level look at how much exterior artificial light is in an area, and then kind of looked at what the levels of depression were. Now, obviously, it's not a causal study, but it sampled population just under 40,000, all aged 50 or older across U.S., England, Ireland, and Northern Ireland. And, it found that there was an increased level of depression, which may or may not be caused by the lights, but it seems to be a little more background noise in this general theme. I always wonder in these cases is if, in much the same way and Stéphane, you probably can understand this, and like winter sports, people who don't participate in winter sports absolutely hate winter and they can't fathom it. But people who participate in winter sports, it's just another season. And it feels like much the same way if you haven't experienced darkness, you may have, when the nights get long, you may have this idea that, there's nothing, I have nothing to look forward to. I have nothing to do. I guess, go down these bad rabbit holes.
I personally used to do a lot in the winter. I played hockey as a kid, go snowshoeing, snowboarding, or our parents would just kick us out, go play in the snow, right? And I lived in a very rural area on the border with Maine, the border town. We crossed the river to go to Port Kent, Maine. The river was the international border. So we'd go and lay on the snowbanks and look at the night sky because we had access to seeing stuff. So I always was a big fan of winter, right? I always looked forward to winter for a multitude of reasons, right? Even the types of meals you have during winter, you have those bigger meals, the big roasts and all that.
The filling meals, right?
Yeah. The difference in meals in the seasons made, all that. So no, I can see if you're not a big enthusiast of winter and how it can probably be dragging on your mood a bit. Actually, there's a lot of studies that have been done in northern Canada with Inuit communities and very far in the territories or northern Alberta or northern Quebec, because there is so much not happening. You're just there in the winter vast lands and all that. There's studies that indicate there's a higher percentage of population that are either depressed or more suicidal and all that. So I think we can have a positive influence in doing stuff like that by finding stuff to do, finding hobbies or passions that get you out during winter. But I think the isolation too with very, very small communities can also be very hard on the emotions and, psychologically as well.
And I find this nighttime, these long winter nights, great for astrophotography, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
Me being
colder the air, the better.
This is great. Wintertime is a great time for many reasons, and one of the reasons nights are a little longer. Let me speed things up here a little bit. I'm going to go through some health stuff and then get us caught up in some other areas. There's a study from Environmental Science and Technology that looked at two different methods that researchers study how artificial light and light impacts individuals. The study looked at 484 individuals over the course of 1,700 nights, essentially 1,748. Each person wore a wrist light sensor and also had a stationary bedside meter in her bedroom. And the study looked to identify the failings of utilizing one method over the other exclusively in research, with the hope to strengthen future methodologies in studies. And for instance, the wrist detector registered light artifacts and body heat as sources of light in the late hours, while the fixed bedside meter only identified light exposure if the individual remained in a fixed location, of course. Additionally, wrist detectors can be obscured by things like sheets or bed covers that, when you roll around at night. So if you're curious to know the results of this study, a study found that nighttime light levels averaged around 1 to 2 lux, and there was a positive correlation between light and nighttime awakenings / sleep interruptions, and the burden of sleep interruptions from light at night fell to women over men. So my wife goes to bed early and I stay up late, and I can definitely probably vouch for that finding right there, because whenever I come in and put my phone down just to, it always lights up when you plug it in and I get in trouble. So that's the short of it. And then one last health study here is They say to assess chronic kidney disease and urbanization. And you want to take note, urbanization in this case wasn't measured strictly by population density and size. Rather, researchers used an average nighttime light calculation, which looked at a 5-year average of nighttime light intensity as derived from satellite data. The data set ranged from 0.017 to 2.176 units across these Chinese cities. This is where a study took place, and the average fell to around 0.438 units. So the higher units in this case simply meant that the nights were brighter. And for you at home who may be curious, the study involved over 5,000 participants over the age of 45 between 2011 to 2015. They essentially looked at 113 cities. For every 0.1 unit increase in artificial light at night, the risk of chronic kidney disease increased by 7.3. However, you'll be forgiven if you thought the study was trying to show a correlation between artificial light at night and kidney disease. That's not the case. While researchers infer that there may be some impact from artificial light at night, instead they focus on other environmental factors like air pollution, climate change, and lifestyle changes, with the light simply being an indication of urbanization. So, interesting one here, something to pay attention to when you're reading papers, how easy it is to get trapped in some of these correlative studies. That is just a good little spot there, just because there's correlation. You have to really pay attention, see if there's any causation. And since we're on geography, I want to touch on something that I see every night. From proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, researchers modeled out how artificial light at night amplifies brightness, finding that low clouds could magnify brightness up to 20 times in the zenith sky luminance. There is even potential for stronger effects in cities over 80,000 individuals, which would mean that you have cities up there in New Brunswick. Stéphane, look at that. See? So I'm curious for you guys, real fast, how bright are the cloudy nights where you live?
Well, I already mentioned my backyard's Bordeaux 3.
Yeah, you're cheating.
Well, yes and no, because St. John is definitely the most industrial city in the province. Like, we have the biggest refinery. We've got a pulp mill that uses more electricity than the entire island of PEI, so Prince Edward Island. So it does have a big luminance dome or light dome because of the heavy industries that are there. But the reason I'm only barely more than 15 minutes away from our downtown center is the easy access to jump on the highway and get there. I'm relatively 35 kilometers away, so just giving me that buffer, I guess, of getting in. But like I said, our province is 85 or more % forested, so it's not a big thing. When you look at a light pollution of North America, a map, you see the Northeast corridor as this bright corridor that includes Quebec and Montreal and Toronto. That's probably one of the highest light polluted places on Earth. It only lets up when you get to Maine and New Brunswick. So we're at proximity of having people come. They already come here for our nature and all that. They've been accidentally discovering our dark skies. So we're really focusing on leading our tourism efforts with making people say, come for our nature, stay for our dark skies.
How bright are skies at night when they're cloudy?
When they're cloudy, it depends. We get a lot of fog, so we get low clouds and all that. So the closer you are to the urban centers, you can see the whiteness in the sky. I mean, I've been in Bordeaux 1 skies where the clouds are black, right? So, I mean, I definitely see the difference. I don't think 99% of the population knows the difference. They don't pay attention to it, but,
Let me go around the circle here. Dani, how bright are your clouds at night?
I'll make 2 points really quickly. So even though I am in dark sky area and I'm doing everything I can to keep my parks dark, light pollution travels so far. So one of the worst points of light pollution for me is actually Dublin in Ireland. So a whole different country. It's 65 miles away. But when it's cloudy, that illuminates the sky hugely. And it can be clear above me and it's cloudy over in Ireland. And I can see the whole of you can see the outline of the country in cloud. Wow. And the second point on that would be that because we're designated with Dark Sky International, the way you monitor your dark sky park is you go out on the most pristine nights for astronomy. So you go when there's a moonless, cloudless night, and that's how you get your data. But I've been arguing for past 2 to 3 years that we need to change the way we monitor, basically, because that's how it is in a best case scenario, but we don't know how bad it gets when it gets cloudy. And if you're talking from a health perspective, and if you're talking from an ecological perspective, which is what I'm really interested in, we need to know how bright our skies are getting on the worst atmospheric conditions. So, for example, if I'm up on one of the hillsides and in the valleys there's low fog, the light gets amplified so much. It's crazy. It really does have an impact. Obviously it's still lower than you, so it's a bit of like a trade-off, but you can still really, really notice it. And if there's any moisture in the air, that massively amplifies it. We've just had our first snowfall of the season, so snow throws up so much of the light. So I can be in like the darkest part of my reserve and I can walk around without a head torch because the snow it's like it's illuminated. It's crazy like how bright it can get. So I think we need to be monitoring for our dark sky reserves, our dark sky parks. We need to know just how bad it can be when the atmospheric conditions are poor, because if you just have one bad light in an area when it's low fog or low cloud, it amplifies it like so much, so much.
Amardeep, how about you? How is it on a cloudy night?
I was hoping that you would avoid this question, because when Stefan said it's going to be bottle 3 and Dani says bottle 4, I was a bit embarrassed to say this because I live in the peak city of Chennai and it's probably bottle 8 or 9. So you can imagine how bright it's going to get. And Chennai has got all the problems that Dani mentioned. It's extremely humid. There's a lot of vapor. It can get extremely cloudy. And a cloudy night is as good as a bright. You don't need to have any lights. It's so bright. You could just walk out without any lights. But I'm just wondering, why do you need street lights when you have so much of great light pollution in the city?
I've wondered that on cloudy nights as well. And we're in the same boat, Amardeep, because I'm in a Portal 8, Portal 9. And you have to close the shades when it's cloudy, right? Because it's so bright. It's like a permanent twilight. It's absurdly bright. But I was just curious about that. That's something that, you see a different pattern of how the sky gradient works. And, I don't know if many people realize how bright the clouds actually are. 2 articles here. First one, this is from an Enlighten America's 2025 event that took place in early October, focused on bringing lighting designers together, apparently with a focus on something that may seem antithetical to lighting engineers. And I think that's darkness, or maybe it's not, because you mentioned that darkness is so important, Amardeep. And one of the topics that stole the show appear to be safety codes requiring 10-foot candles of illumination. And then there's also this article about, we've lit our way in a complex problem. This all showed up in Inside Lighting, which, kind of covers the lighting industry. So the products and the rollout of the lighting industry versus the implementation expectations of designers. And I know a lot of this is contractors push for things, but how much of that lighting industry do people actually care about their impacts?
That's a very good question and an extremely complex question. And I'll need to break it up into different parts when I'm to answer this. When you ask when there's a divide, yes, there's a definite divide between what industry wants, because there are different players in here. One side, we have the lighting designers. Now, recently, in the last 5-10 years or so, lighting designers have been sensitized about the importance of light pollution, how harmful excess lighting can be. So that's something which the lighting designers are able to understand. Now, we as lighting designers, we have to work a lot with lighting manufacturers because they are the ones who are churning out the products. We need to specify the products. So our next closest partners, if I may use this phrase, is to work with these lighting manufacturers, tell them about, hey, we need to have light fixtures that are dark sky friendly, environment conscious. You can't have light pollution. So lighting manufacturers are increasingly working towards it. Now, there are certain lighting manufacturers who are really sincerely doing this. Then there are others who are just doing it for marketing gimmicks. It's very difficult to try and understand which one is the genuine one from all of these markets that are coming in. And then on the other side, we have the clients, and then we have the policymakers. So it's not an easy answer to this one. So clients are getting these incentives saying that if you follow green building norms, and green buildings have come into to play about night sky, light pollution. So when clients have been put pressure, if you want to have a platinum rating or a gold rating, you need to follow these stringent norms for light pollution. And then the clients come back to the lighting designers, hey, are you following these? In a way, it's good, but how well are these implemented? That's a major divide again. And it's a large gap. And hopefully, we are really working towards trying to close these gaps because there are too many players, too many things at stake. So there's not an easy black or white answer. There are too many gray areas in this whole.
If you were to say that the current trend, would you be optimistic about the current trend, or would that not be a word you would use?
I mean, optimism is, again, a very big word. I would say, yes, we are hopeful for it, but we want a lot more that needs to be done. I mean, a lot has been done, but the manner in which things are being implemented, in the end, are the end users receptive to all of these implementation and changes? That's also a major question here, because I've heard about or read about cities where cities are not yet ready to implement all these ordinances that have been trying to go for dark skies. So yes, we are wanting things to happen. Optimism is a good word, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done.
Yeah, I look at places like here in the US, I don't think regulations are the way to do it here. I think it needs to be industry driven and best practices driven. Regulations entangles it in a lot of weird politics in the US.
Yeah,
I agree with you there, Bill, because right now, the only reason a municipality or an urban center would consider an ordinance, or in Canada, they're called bylaws, is applying for a designation of a dark sky community, right? Other than that, there's no huge rush or a huge urgency for municipalities to date that. So everything else that's not mandated by possibly a municipal or ordinance and all that, then the industry should definitely have a role to play in addressing all that, because I'm dealing with this right now is where we're trying to implement astro strategies and dark sky accreditation and education and policy comes in from the municipal councils that we're dealing with, and all that is the political climate around the world right now is very touchy. Politicians are very hesitant to rock the boat too much, right, with something that could be perceived as unpopular or whatever. But at the same time, the municipalities that I'm working with is this is coming in because they're already have really good controls on the light pollution. Their readings are really good. We want to protect that instead of saying an ordinance is that has to deal with enforcement and all that. We're like, no, the municipality, the community already fits with the designation. They're going to get the accreditation. This is a future forward thing. And what we're doing is doesn't rock the boat with the current population or business community because the requirements are already met. We're trying to protect the future forward. So when the urban planner gets the application for a building license, whether it's a residential, commercial, or industrial, they're given the package on this is what the requirements for lighting are. Whether you're dealing with an architect, an engineer, or a contractor, they have to obey to these. But that's because the legal mechanism is in there. It's where there's gaps that there's no legal mechanism is where I think the industry can really step up.
That was a good point, Stéphane. Thank you for being insightful on that, because I agree. I think I think even more so here in the U.S., policy isn't going to be the solution. The U.S. is a very fragmented country when it comes to pretty much anything at the moment. Actually, we're kind of a bit in disarray, and policy is not going to be the solution to any of this. But to that point, we'll finish out today's show with a little bit of political theater from here in the U.S. For those of you who aren't aware of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, it sits outside of Miami, and there's a neighborhood, Melrose Park. The community, actually, Fort Lauderdale tried to install over 500 streetlights in this neighborhood with a tax burden of $1.3 million for the first year and $431,000 for each additional year of perpetuity for maintenance. And this is going to be shared across all the residents of Fort Lauderdale. The Melrose Park area specific is home to 10,000 residents. While the cost was technically at the crux of this issue, there is a political rivalry which took place between a lady named Donna Guthrie, the president of the Melrose Park Civic Association, and City Commissioner Pamela Beasley Pittman. Beasley Pittman beat out Guthrie in the 2022 City Commissioner's race, and since then, I guess they've been kind of at each other's throats. At the end of the day, it appears that the community came out in droves to influence the council's decision on purchasing street lighting. One resident named Michael claimed that the community was being held hostage by a small amount of residents, 5 in particular, who are opposed to street lighting. And the resounding response by community members who came out was that this is a waste of time. Lights create security. Let's get them up. Lights are security. Stupid. Which countered Guthrie's message, who had Guthrie previously kept the lights at bay for 3 different tries by city government. Guthrie's message was that increased lighting would create insecurity. And this is a message that many folks who argue against excessive lighting try and make. So this is a very curious case that happened actually in the real world. This Fort Lauderdale community issue is a microcosm, I think, of what responsible lighting advocates have to deal with. Dani, you wrote a whole book on this. You did a recent Dark Sky International video, I think, at the advocates meeting on this concept of safety and an understanding of safety. So let's pretend that Guthrie is a dark sky advocate. I don't know her circumstance. I don't know much about her. I wasn't able to find out too much. That's not to say she isn't, but let's just pretend that she is in this case. How would Guthrie have best approached the situation that would have garnered widespread support?
I think it's really tricky because it does depend on like your community and the community. You need to know your community and you need to know how to read them, what makes them tick and what's going to sell in your community, basically. From what I know of Fort Lauderdale, is there's lots of super yachts. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a suburban area.
Yeah, and it's quite like a wealthy area, isn't it?
Well, it's a Miami area. I think this area, I'm not sure if this is a very wealthy area. I think this particular area is a very immigrant area. A lot of people from all different backgrounds are living in this area.
I think, when it comes to politics in particular, light can become such a heated topic because it can be point scoring. And unfortunately, for the longest time, people have been told that light equals security. So it's really, really easy for a politician to be like, well, if you don't want lights, you're going to leave people unsafe. So these people who are living without lights are being told they're living in somewhere unsafe. So they're going to become more fearful. So it's really, really tricky. And like you said, tensions are heightened in the US politically at the moment, and it's so easy to make any topic so divisive. And lighting already can be quite divisive because it leans into some of our core, the things that people really worry about the most, like safety, like keeping their property safe. So I think all you can do, and sometimes it's not enough, sometimes you can do everything right and you can throw science at it, but sometimes people don't want the science and the facts. Sometimes people go with their heart, their feeling over what is actual facts. So you could be the best dark sky advocate in the world. If that's not been fostered in that community, if you've not had people on the ground who've been explaining this for a long time and you're not in a community that's, they're comfortable with the idea of darkness and they understand it as a complex issue, then it's a tough fight, I would say. I think it's a tough one. I think if you want to do anything dark sky in a community, there's got to be a lot of legwork. There's got to be a lot of community stuff on the ground so that people have a long-standing understanding of what's happening, why you're doing it. So people don't just think, oh, the politician doesn't want us to have lights. It's all about this or that. Yeah, so it's very easy, isn't it, to point score in politics.
Would it have been better if Guthrie, and I want to make this point there, that if you watch the YouTube of the meetings, there's no point where people actually cite crime. And I get the sense that this isn't a high crime area. There is an old lady who stood up and said, we have lights and one of the neighbor lights up the side here. There's really, I haven't ever felt unsafe walking 20 minutes to convenience store or whatnot. So you get the sense that this isn't a crime-ridden area, but would have Guthrie's path been better if she was said, okay, you know what? People are probably going to want the lights. Maybe I should influence what kind of lights they are.
Yeah, absolutely. That would have been, because when we talk about dark skies, especially in like urban areas, we don't expect people to live in darkness, don't expect people to live with no lighting whatsoever. But it is definitely about control and using light in the most effective way. So we've just been talking about like industry and policy. And personally, from where I live in the country that I am in, a two-pronged attack work. So having the policy there when it's needed, but also laying a gauntlet at the feet of industry and saying, your lights are terrible. Make better lights. Make lights that are better for people. They're better for wildlife. We've just worked on a project with Kerem, who was one of your previous guests, Kerem from Dark Source, and we designed a light with him for our communities because we couldn't find anything that manufacturers would make for us that fit what people typically have on their doors around here, so just on the door. So we worked with Kerem and we sponsored basically him to go away and dream up a fitting that would work, because manufacturers at the moment say, well, unless you're going to put in a huge order, we're not going to make them for you. So until the demand is there, they're not going to make it. And as Dr. Dugar said, there's a lot of people who are greenwashing with light where they say they've got dark sky lighting, but when you actually look at them, they're terrible, they're no good. So this could have been a real driver for economic growth. And if you want to say, in America, if you want jobs, whoever taps this field for dark sky lighting, there's an opportunity there. I think that might have been a way to do it as well.
Danny, I think that argument could have worked maybe a few years back.
Yeah.
I don't know if we live in a world that is very logical in this country at the moment.
The only thing I would throw on there, Bill, real quick, is if they went 3 times before to try and implement, an active outreach and education should have been started immediately to change the misconception of we need light for protection. We need some light. You got to think that too much lighting takes away shadows. Criminals need lights to see what they're doing, unfortunately, right? First responders, if there's too much light, that endangers them. But it should have been, I suspect this is over a stretch of several years, that since the first request was made and she was successful in beating it back 3 times, well, there should have been a ground roots effort to start educating people on the real facts and all that. I think it's just like we try to keep putting the fire out instead of implementing a fire management system or, type of thing.
Just like what you mentioned about crime, there was a recent study that tried to draw up a relationship between light levels and crime. And interestingly, the research study has come up with the question that there is no plausible relationship between brightness and crime. So it doesn't necessarily mean just because you made the place bright, you're going to be avoiding crimes. So that's, again, another myth that is being busted with current research. So
there's one on Dark Sky International in Chicago where they put the lighting around the subway and all that, and they documented an increase in crime because there was now lighting.
Yeah, I think to Danny's point, the crime thing is an emotional pull, right? And you can't rely on using facts against emotion. I think that's just...
Or Americans at the moment.
Yeah, right. That's true.
Sorry.
It's okay. Hey, I live in this. But okay, I want to thank you guys for joining me on this first episode of December. I think that's it for today. I went a little late. I want to wish everyone happy holidays for those who celebrate. We have one more episode to get out before 2025 ends, so keep an eye out for that. I have our special holiday potluck episode where I ask guests to return back to the show with their favorite story of 2025. And you really never know. I never know who's going to show up and what they're going to show up with. So it's always a good time. As we close out today, I want to give my guests a final chance to plug themselves. Dr. Amardeep Dugar, where can folks learn more about the projects you're working on? How can they connect with you? How can they reach out to you?
Easiest way would be to look at my LinkedIn profile. Instagram is something that I'm primarily a little bit more active. So these are the 2 places where you can actually connect with me. Just do search Amardeep Dugar, find me on Instagram and on LinkedIn.
And Danny, where can folks pick up your shiny new book? What is the name of it? I can't believe I forgot to mention the name of the book in the beginning. I can't believe this. I apologize. Why don't you tell us about the name of the book? We'll talk about the new book in the beginning of the second episode, but why don't you tell us about the name?
The book is called Creatures of Darkness, and it's sort of like an almanac of 100 creatures that depend on darkness. So they're not just nocturnal animals, they're animals that need darkness to survive. And I was really pleased actually that Amardeep brought up the elephants, because I speak about elephants in the book. They're one of my elephants. One of my creatures in the book. So it's a really pretty book. It is available in all good bookshops in the UK and Europe. I don't think it's released in America until March 2026.
Okay.
That is the next year, isn't it? 26. Don't know what year I'm in anymore.
Yeah, no, it's fun. Time traveler over there.
So yeah, anybody who likes wildlife, anybody who likes dark skies, anybody who just likes facts, it's a great one if you're on any quiz teams, because there's so many facts in there. You'll be boring people for weeks with all your little facts about animals.
There you go. Good for trivia, folks. Good for trivia. All right, Stéphane Picard, how can people learn more about the dark sky corridor that you are planning up there?
Yeah, definitely. Visit our website at cliffvalleyastronomy.com, on our social media on Facebook and Instagram with the handle at Cliff Valley Astronomy. We're so happy to have this corridor starting to take shape. Coincidentally, it's also home to 2 UNESCO designation, and it's the only place in North America where 2 UNESCO designations overlap. One of them is the Fundy Biosphere, and the eco and biodiversity is comparable to that of the Amazon. So that's a really big, important thing of why we're really focused on beyond astrotourism and protecting our night sky, the impact on the wildlife and so forth. And David, the UNESCO group, has been very supportive and engaging. So we're fortunate to have them as partners. And now we're taking our show across the country. We're working with partners in Ontario and Alberta. And yeah, things are pretty busy at the moment.
I want to thank my guests one last time. Of course, the biggest thanks of all goes to you, the listener. Thank you for staying with us, tuning in throughout all of 2025. Wish you a healthy and prosperous 2026. As a reminder, this show is listener supported. We rely exclusively on the support of you, the listener. If you like what you hear, why not support the show? This show is recorded on November 23rd. You can learn more about today's show by visiting our website, lightpollutionnews.com. Keep an eye out for us on whatever social channels you use. Amardeep, I see you raise your hand real fast.
Yeah, just wanted to say that my handle is also called Lighting Research and Design. So fairly easy for you want to look up my work.
You can find them at Lighting Research and Design. So thank you once again. I'm your host, Bill McGeaney, reminding you to only shine the light where it's needed.